The views expressed on the Nova Society are those of the panelists and guests and do not necessarily reflect the views or opinions of the Phoenix Research Institute or any institution which any panel member is associated.
Welcome back to the Nova Society. I'm your host, Dr. Brooklyn Ann Weldon, and I'm here with my panel, Dr. Scott Gershwer and Dr. Mark Bound. Today we will be answering listener emails from our gigantically bulging bag of emails, and we have a question from Robert, who lives in Chicago, Illinois. And Robert asks, the other day, the commissioner of Major League Baseball, just changed the rules on permanent bans to the Hall of Fame on players after they have died. Knowing that Dr. Scott and Dr. Mark are baseball fans, I wanted to know your take on this rule change. Now, Pete Rose is eligible, and so is shoeless Joe Jackson from the 1919 Black Sox scandal. I believe the rule change opens the Hall up to another 15 or so players. But let's stick to these two. Should Rose and Jackson be admitted to the Hall, and why or why not? And I am out of my depth here.
Well, I'll say to our friend from Chicago here that both Mark and I are Mets fans. And while Mark is considerably older than I am, I'm sure he remembers, just as I do, the 1973 National League Championship Series, in which in Game 3, I believe it was, there was an altercation between Pete Rose and Bud Harrelson.
Yes.
And Pete Rose trying to break up a double play, spikes high, rolled into Harrelson. He was already angry at Harrelson because Harrelson made fun of the Big Red Machines hitting in the first two games of the series. Here's an amazing thing, Mark. I don't know if you realize this, because I had to look it up. They played all 5 of those games in a row. The first two in Cincinnati on a Saturday and a Sunday, and then a Monday game 3 at Shea Stadium at 2:00 in the afternoon. All 3 New York games were at 2:00 in the afternoon. And I remember this not very vividly. I don't remember what grade I was in, but I had, because my dad was in the electronics field, I had a small, tiny transistor radio that I brought to school with me and plugged in. It had an earphone that I plugged into it and was listening to the game and giving my classmates updates for the hour or so that we were still at school while the game was on. And I got caught, and my teacher sent me to the principal, and the principal's office had this little ante room, a little waiting room with a couple of chairs. And I had to sit down on one of the chairs and wait for the principal, who poked his head out and said, "You just wait there." And he went back into his office. And I'm sure he was listening to the game in his office, and I'm sitting there with my earphone in, and I'm listening to the game. And then the bus came, and he came out and he says, "Go get your bus." And I had to leave his office. Nothing ever came of it at all. But these games were at 2:00 in the afternoon.
Yep.
And all through Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. The series was over on Wednesday. That was the day, I'm pretty sure it was Game 5, that I got in trouble, because I vaguely remember it had to be on a Wednesday because of what we were covering in school. I think on Wednesdays, the Catholic kids got to leave class early in New York and go to religious instruction, they called it, right? So we had from 2 to 3. We didn't have all the Catholic kids in the class because they were going to St. Mary's or one of the other Catholic schools that they had nearby. So we would sit there and do something not particularly important on Wednesday afternoons, which is why I thought I could get away with listening to the game in class.
Yeah. And yeah, I remember the altercation.
Yeah, so Pete Rose to me is an evil man who should not be in the Hall of Fame. Has nothing to do with betting on baseball.
All right, so Pete Rose. Yeah, I have very bad memories of Pete Rose. But then again, Ty Cobb is in, and Honus Wagner is in, and by all accounts, historically, they were really bad guys. I mean, they were just bad guys. My issue with Rose was that the scandal that he was in, and he got caught. Does this happen? Yeah, I believe it does. I believe it happens probably more than we think it does. But he got caught. All right, own up to it. You know, own up to it and live with it. And he wouldn't do that in the beginning. And then after that, it was like the oh woe was me for the the last part of his life. Oh woe was me. I can't be in the Hall of Fame. Gee, your numbers say you should be in the Hall of Fame. I don't think anybody can doubt that. And I can see where people say, well, he was a bad guy. He wasn't a great guy. Charlie Hustle was a bit of an asshole. But then again, as I say, so was Honus Wagner, and so was a lot of players back in the day. So, what is really the benchmark for being in the Hall of Fame? If we're going to take personality, if we're going to take sportsmanship, if we're going to take things like that into account, then I think we really need to relook at who's already in the Hall of Fame, because there's a bunch of cheating boogers in there. People that threw spitballs and all sorts of stuff that cheated. And if we're not going to do that, then I think you got to open it up to Barry Bonds. I think that Barry Bonds now, with his numbers, even though there's that asterisk, well, yeah, he had all these home runs, but it was steroid era. And so they got to make up their mind what the Hall of Fame is all about. There's some people that should be in the Hall of Fame, I've always thought, that haven't been. I think Keith Hernandez should have been in the Hall of Fame.
Should be.
I truly believe Keith Hernandez, one of the best first basemen ever. He was an MVP, even though he shared it with, I believe it was Stargell, even though he shared it back in 79. There's so many people that should be in the Hall of Fame that aren't. And they always said it was all about the numbers. And my problem with the Hall of Fame is, who are these guys that actually pick who goes and who doesn't? They're baseball writers, they're, baseball people supposedly. But I sometimes you see a bias. Sometimes you see a bias in there on these selections. And I think that's where, if anything dilutes the Hall of Fame, and I heard an argument, I did hear the argument, if you put Pete Rose in, it dilutes the Hall of Fame. I think the Hall of Fame is already being diluted by some of the people that are not being selected that probably should be there because of whatever prejudice or whatever, argument that these baseball writers and the people that are in the selection committee can come up with. My comment, though, is more about Shoeless Joe Jackson, who, by the way, is from Greenville, South Carolina, which is about 20 minutes down the road from me. And Shoeless Joe Jackson, yes, he was in the 1919 Black Sox, and they did throw it to the Reds. There was no doubt the pitchers, they were, a whole bunch of them were on the take. However, Shoeless Joe Jackson had an exemplary World Series. There is no indication whatsoever that Shoeless Joe Jackson tried to throw anything, because he had an absolutely brilliant series, and he was a great player. My argument would be more for him because of his numbers. My problem with Joe Jackson is that because of him being banned from baseball by Kennesaw, who was the commissioner, Judge Kennesaw, his career wasn't as long as it could have been.
Yeah, Kennesaw Mountain Landis, right?
Kennesaw Mountain Landis, yeah.
Who came in because of that scandal.
Yeah. And I think that, and Mountain Landis was known as being a pretty tough judge. And he basically painted a very wide brush. And if he had looked at the stats from that series, I don't think any reasonable person could make the argument that Joe Jackson was trying to throw the World Series. He was just in the wrong place, on the wrong team, at the wrong time, with the wrong people. So,
supposedly he's not smart enough to know how to throw a game.
It could very well be. That's very possible as well too. So my argument would be more for him. Pete Rose, I have very little sympathy for, mostly because after all the years, I got tired of listening to him whine. Is his numbers good? Yeah. I can't take that away from the man. Can't take it
Yeah.
away.
Well, I mean, Mickey Mantle once said of Pete Rose, if I would have hit as many singles as he did, I would have worn a dress to play baseball.
That's exactly right. Yeah. So, a
A lot of hits, a lot of singles.
lot of hits. A lot of hits. Do I agree with the rule as after you die, if you're banned for life, that maybe, yeah, okay, you're banned for life. Now you're dead. Maybe you shouldn't be banned and maybe out of the look. But I think we really have to look at, and I believe it is, I think the emailer said there was like 15 other people that were now eligible. I think you've got to really look at all of those case by case and see not only after the ban how they conducted themselves. Joe Jackson basically did nothing. He came back to Greenville, South Carolina, and he worked here, and that was it. He did nothing. You never heard from him. Pete Rose, anybody that would listen to him, he would whine about it because he felt he belonged. Joe Jackson didn't really care. Joe Jackson was like, hey, whatever. Even though I think Joe Jackson's case is probably less justice than the Pete Rose case. So, but I mean, just recently they fired that umpire for something betting was involved into it, and he was the most accurate umpire in all of Major League Baseball. I mean,
now are we supposed to expect that Shohei Ohtani, whose interpreter was supposedly betting on games, that Ohtani was not betting on games through his interpreter? That there's that as well.
Exactly.
And then as you brought up the steroids, guys, Barry Bonds probably had Hall of Fame numbers before he ever took a steroid.
Probably.
And blew up. I remember him when he was on Pittsburgh. I remember him very, very well in the 80s, and he was an amazing player. Roger Clemens, there's a bunch, right? Great players who got caught up in the steroid era, and they're not in the Hall of Fame. I guess what's his name from the Yankees? Oh wow.
Yeah, I know who you're talking about from the Yankees.
See, I was thinking Mark McGwire.
No,
Mark McGwire, Sammy Sosa.
Hernandez? Is it Hernandez from the
Mark,
Yankees?
help me out. He played in Seattle, and then he came over and then went to Texas, and then the Yankees.
His first name begins with an A from the Yankees.
Wow!
Oh gosh, I can't even think.
What a dumb brain fog on that one. Sorry, all.
I know who you're talking about.
Yeah.
Well, I will say this about steroids. As a former pitcher in Division I ball, NCAA, they still have to hit it. You could take as many steroids as you want. You still have to hit the ball. And Bonds was very good. Even though he was like jacked up on steroids, he was still pretty good at hitting the ball. You could let King Kong get up there. You still got to hit the ball. And Scott is still
Rodriguez. Sorry, I cut you off.
Oh, A-Rod.
A-Rod.
Yeah.
A-Rod. A-Rod's who you're talking about.
True, you still have to hit it.
Sorry about that.
How can you forget old A-Rod?
Right. So my understanding from somebody who is actually in the minor leagues with A-Rod was that he was taking steroids when he was like a teenager. And A-Rod has only admitted to taking steroids while he was playing for the Texas Rangers. So, there's kind of a denial there from him as well that you would like to see him come clean on. But, I guess people are trying to preserve their legacies, and that's why they do stuff like that. I don't think it's important enough to really dwell on much longer than that. I'm not a big Pete Rose fan, but that's because I'm a Met fan, and he outweighed Bud Harrelson by quite a bit, and got into that fight with him out there on the field, which really almost cost the Mets that game because the commissioner of baseball was going to throw the game for the Reds in that one.
And it doesn't only go to steroids and stuff. Let's look at Carlos Beltran. Will he probably get in? In the last ballot, he got 70%. He needs 75%. But he was involved in the Houston sign stealing scandal that
Right.
basically lost him the New York Mets managerial job. I mean, so
Yeah.
where do you draw the line? So I guess
Well,
the
I don't
question
know.
is,
So when Adam Wainwright threw that pitch, wouldn't it have been great if he knew it was coming instead of standing there with the bat on his shoulder?
that would have been really great, yes. Except that would have been very nice. So what do you think, Scott? Pete Rose, in or out?
Yeah, in. He's got the numbers. It's a
All right,
numbers game.
Joe
And
Jackson.
you always put on his plaque. He got caught for cheating,
That's
was
true.
held out of the Hall of Fame until he died. Yeah, but he's a Hall of Famer. Shoeless Joe, again, I don't know the numbers or anything like that. It's a little before my time. But
Weren't you in high school when he was playing in 1919?
from what I understand, Shoeless Joe should be in the Hall of Fame. And eventually the steroids guys are all getting in, let's face it.
Yeah, probably after they're dead, but yeah, they'll probably all get in. But yeah, I agree. Make a standard, stick with it, and go. So hopefully we answered that little baseball trivia. And the Mets are at the time of our recording. Mets are in first place.
Oh,
They
good.
have 28 wins, the most wins in the entire in all of Major League Baseball.
Great.
So they play the Pirates, the hapless Pirates tonight. And any of our listeners out there, if you can throw a 45-mile-an-hour pitch, if you can run the base in less than, say, I don't know, a week, if you can have any chance of hitting a ball blindfolded, like somebody that's blindfolded, I hear the Colorado Rockies are looking for new prospects to come and join their team and be their manager, because they put poor Bud Black out to pasture.
Well, Mark,
What's a manager going to do when you got such a bad team?
You can be the manager, and I have a question.
Sure.
Why is this guy shoeless, Joe Jackson? I mean, did he run around barefoot or something? I don't understand the shoeless part.
The legend behind that was that he grew up without having ever worn shoes. And when they put shoes on him, he didn't like it. So he'd go in the outfield and take his shoes off and play shoeless in the outfield. That's the story that I heard about him, which may or may not be true.
And
but he didn't grow up wearing shoes.
No. And he died in Greenville, South Carolina. As I say, 20 miles down the road. He grew up and was born in Pickens, South Carolina, which is about 30 miles down the road. His career batting average was .356.
Not bad at all.
I'd say that probably.
How many seasons did he play?
He played. Let's see. He played. All right. So let's see. He was with the Philadelphia Athletics, 1908 to 1909. He was with the Cleveland Naps, or then Indians, from 2010 to 2015, and then the Chicago White Sox from 1915 to 1920. So he played 12 seasons. Had a career batting average of .356, hit 54 home runs, had 792 runs batted in. Not a bad record.
No, not bad at all.
And I think if he had had more seasons, I think he probably would have been even better. And let's remember, home runs back then in the 1900s did not come like they came with the enclosed stadiums that we have today. Babe Ruth would probably not have hit as many home runs as he hit if in the 1920s they didn't enclose stadiums and didn't have fences. And many of these stadiums did not have fences, or those fences were like 550 feet out, of which, Hercules probably couldn't reach. So just to put a little into that. So hopefully we've answered that. My vote would be Pete Rose, begrudgingly, yes. And I say that begrudgingly. And Joe Jackson, I would say yes, definitely.
Alrighty, well, thank you for the question. I'm sorry I don't have really anything to contribute to that, but that was a fun question. I enjoyed that, and thank you as always for listening to the Nova Society. We appreciate the question and your listenership, and do take care, and we will see you again next time.
The Nova Society is a production of Nova Society Media, a division of the Phoenix Research Institute. We'd like to thank our production partners, Buzzsprout, who hosts the Nova Society, Audacity, our editing partners, Apple iTunes, the largest source of podcasts and music on the internet, Spotify, the most popular platform for the Nova Society, and iHeartRadio, your source for all things music and podcasting. The Nova Society is available on all of these and other quality platforms listed in our description. We'd also like to thank all of our listeners. Without your support, the Nova Society would not be possible. If you have a question or comment, we can be reached at nova.society.podcast@gmail.com. So for Dr. Brooklyn Ann Weldon, Dr. Scott Gershwer, and all of our production partners here at the Nova Society, I'm Dr. Mark Bound. Remember, the true power in society is knowledge. Thanks for listening, and we will see you again next time. We'd like to thank our sponsor for this episode, the Journal of Interdisciplinary Conflict Science. The JCIS is an open journal for upcoming scholars. The JCIS is currently accepting article submissions on an ongoing basis. The JCIS is a publication of NovaWorks, a scholarly depository at Nova Southeastern University. A link to the journal is in our description.